Europe on the brink, 10 countries facing collapse in 2025. The warning signs are flashing. 10 European nations stand at a critical tipping point, and the coming year could determine their fate. In today's fast-changing world, even the most powerful countries are not immune to economic meltdowns, political upheaval, and social unrest. The cracks are widening, and by 2025, these 10 nations could be facing a crisis so severe that it shakes the entire global order. Many believe that wealthy, developed nations are safe, but history tells a different story. No country is invincible. From financial instability to energy shortages, from leadership crises to shifting alliances, the domino effect of these challenges can trigger disruptions that spread far beyond their borders, affecting economies, industries, and even everyday lives worldwide. If you value deep insights and critical analysis, take a moment to like this video, share it with those who need to see it, and subscribe to the Journey of Wisdom. Your support helps bring in-depth research and thought-provoking discussions to light. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, consider leaving a super thanks. It helps us continue delivering content that matters in these uncertain times. Now, let's explore the 10 European countries that could be on the brink of collapse in 2025. 10. France, the rising tide of unrest. France has always been a land of revolution and resistance, where history is written in the streets as much as in government halls. Yet today, the tensions that simmer beneath the surface are no longer just moments of unrest. They have become a permanent undercurrent, threatening to pull the nation into deeper instability. What started as a reaction to rising fuel taxes quickly evolved into the Yellow Vest movement, a powerful cry from the working and middle classes who felt abandoned by the government. Years later, that anger has not faded, it has only intensified. Fueled by pension reforms, labor disputes, and a growing divide between the ruling elite and the people, the streets of Paris and other major cities have become battlegrounds of ideology, where frustration over economic inequality, the high cost of living, and political detachment has created a society on edge. The Buddha once said, "Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." Yet, in France, this collective resentment is not dissolving, it is spreading, accumulating and growing more volatile with each passing year. Beyond the protests, economic stagnation has cast a long shadow over the country. With youth unemployment reaching worrying levels, an entire generation is struggling to step into a future that seems increasingly uncertain. When young people lose hope, it doesn't just affect them individually. It creates a ripple effect that weakens consumer confidence, reduces innovation, and ultimately slows economic growth. This is not just a temporary dip in the market. This is a foundational weakness that could determine the nation's future trajectory. Meanwhile, France's public debt has surged past 110% of GDP, leaving the government with limited options to respond effectively to crises. A heavily indebted nation is like a man walking a tightrope. Any misstep, whether economic or political, could send it spiraling downward. Realize this, and you will find strength. Yet, if a country cannot control its own economic destiny, how can it expect to remain stable in an increasingly uncertain world? Adding to the crisis is the steady decline of France's once mighty industrial sector. Globalization and foreign competition have left factories shuttered, skilled labor underutilized, and entire regions struggling to redefine their economic purpose. A strong industrial base is the backbone of any thriving economy, but as production moves elsewhere, France finds itself increasingly reliant on external forces it cannot control. And then there is the political fragmentation, a deeply divided electorate where extreme factions are gaining ground, further polarizing an already divided society. The inability to find common ground has made governance increasingly difficult, eroding trust in leadership and turning every election into a battleground of ideology rather than a solution-driven process. The words of Confucius come to mind. A man who does not think and plan long ahead will find trouble at his door. Yet for France, long-term vision is being sacrificed for short-term political survival. Stability requires trust, cooperation, and a willingness to adapt, yet all these elements seem to be eroding. If France wishes to reclaim its place as a pillar of European strength, it must learn the lessons of history, that no empire, no economy, and no society is immune to decline unless it actively chooses to evolve. The cracks in the foundation are visible, and if they are ignored, they may soon become fractures too deep to repair. 9. Germany, an economic heart under strain. Germany, long seen as the beating heart of Europe's economy, now finds itself at a crossroads unlike any it has faced in decades. The nation's once unshakable economic foundation is now trembling under the weight of multiple crises. The transition away from nuclear energy, once hailed as a bold step towards sustainability, has instead exposed the country to an unprecedented energy crisis, one that has only been magnified by its past reliance on Russian gas. Now, with soaring energy costs crippling both households and industries, Germany's manufacturing and industrial powerhouses, automotive giants, chemical producers, and heavy manufacturers, are struggling to keep production viable. Some have already begun looking beyond German borders, eyeing countries with cheaper, more stable energy supplies, and if this trend continues, it could hollow out the very industries that made Germany an economic leader. Yet, energy is only one piece of Germany's crisis. A demographic time bomb is ticking in the background, one that threatens not only the economy, but the very fabric of society. With one of the oldest populations in Europe, the country faces mounting pressure on its pension funds, healthcare systems, and social services. The shrinking workforce means fewer people paying into these systems, while the number of retirees in need of support continues to rise. For a nation that has long thrived on productivity and efficiency, this is a dangerous imbalance. A nation's strength is built on its people, and without a sustainable population to drive it forward, even the most powerful economies can falter. On the political front, a storm is brewing. The rise of the far-right Alternative for Germany, AfD party, is not just a political shift, it is a symptom of deeper frustrations boiling beneath the surface. As the cost of living rises, as wages fail to keep up with inflation, and as industries face increasing uncertainty, many Germans are losing faith in the establishment. The growing polarization threatens the very stability Germany has prided itself on for years. History has shown, time and again, that when a society becomes too divided, when trust in leadership crumbles, and when economic hardship pushes people to extremes, the consequences can be devastating. The Buddha once said, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." And yet, Germany now faces a crucial moment where its future depends on the actions taken right now. Will it find a way to unite its people, stabilize its economy, and reclaim its industrial power, or will division and crisis push it toward a path of decline? Challenges are inevitable, but survival depends on adaptability. Nations, like people, must learn to change with the times, to balance growth with sustainability, and to address the fears of their people before those fears turn into something far more dangerous. Eight. Spain, a nation divided. Spain, a nation rich in history and culture, is now facing one of its greatest challenges, a deep and growing division that threatens both its political stability and economic future. The scars left by the failed 2017 Catalonia independence referendum have never fully healed. What began as a regional movement has turned into a long and bitter struggle between the Spanish government and separatist forces. Even today, the call for independence remains strong, with Catalan leaders demanding more autonomy or outright separation, fueling a divide that seems impossible to bridge. But here's the issue. While politicians argue over independence, the real problems facing Spain, economic instability, high unemployment, and environmental challenges, are left unresolved. Beyond politics, Spain's economic foundation is worryingly fragile. For decades, the country has relied heavily on tourism and construction, industries that, while profitable, are also dangerously volatile. Tourism may bring in billions, but it is highly sensitive to global crises, as seen during the pandemic when Spain's economy came to a standstill overnight. One crisis, one economic downturn, one shift in global travel trends, and millions of jobs could disappear in an instant. Meanwhile, the construction sector, once the driving force behind Spain's rapid expansion, has never fully recovered from the 2008 financial crash. Empty buildings, stalled projects, and fluctuating market confidence have left the industry unstable and unreliable. At the same time, youth unemployment in Spain remains shockingly high, leaving an entire generation disillusioned and without hope. A society's future depends on its young people, yet in Spain, too many are stuck in unstable jobs, short-term contracts, or worse, no employment at all. When young people lose faith in the system, they either leave in search of better opportunities abroad or become disengaged from society altogether. What kind of future can Spain expect when its brightest minds are either trapped in uncertainty or forced to build their futures elsewhere? Add to that a rising national deficit that stretches the country's finances thin, and an environmental crisis that threatens agriculture through worsening desertification, and you begin to see a nation facing a perfect storm of challenges. But Spain is not the first country to face hardship, and history has shown that resilience and unity are the keys to survival. The Buddha once said, "Unity can only be manifested by the binary. Unity itself and the idea of unity are already two." Spain must decide whether to continue fighting itself or find a way to bridge its divisions and move forward together. Every crisis presents an opportunity. Will Spain seize this moment to rebuild, diversify its economy, and mend its political wounds? Or will it continue down a path of growing fractures and missed opportunities? In the end, nations, like individuals, must adapt or risk decline. Seven. Poland, a democracy in crisis. Poland, once celebrated as a beacon of post-communist success, now finds itself at a turning point where democratic values and political stability hang in the balance. Over the past decade, the ruling Law and Justice Party, PiS, has been accused of systematically eroding judicial independence, tightening control over the media, and weakening the very checks and balances that ensure democracy functions. These actions have not only deepened internal divisions, but also put Poland on a collision course with the European Union, which has repeatedly warned of sanctions and funding cuts should Poland fail to uphold democratic principles. When a nation begins to suppress opposition and silence dissenting voices, history tells us that instability follows. As George Orwell famously wrote, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows." But what happens when those in power attempt to rewrite the rules? While political turmoil dominates the headlines, Poland's economic situation is both a source of pride and growing concern. It has outperformed some of its European neighbors, boasting steady economic growth and industrial resilience. Yet significant challenges loom on the horizon. Rising inflation is squeezing household incomes, making it harder for ordinary citizens to afford basic necessities, while energy shortages threaten industries that rely on stable power supplies. Tensions with the EU over climate policies and coal dependency further complicate matters, placing Poland in a difficult position between economic pragmatism and environmental responsibility. Can a country maintain economic prosperity when it is at odds with its biggest trading partners and financial backers? Poland's reliance on EU funding and foreign investments has helped fuel its economic rise, but as Brussels applies pressure and potential funding cuts become more likely, the risks of financial strain become harder to ignore. The words of the Buddha echo here: 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Poland must soon face the reality that continued political defiance may come at an enormous economic cost. Yet Poland's greatest challenge is perhaps the growing divide within its own society. Politics has created deep fractures, with Poles increasingly split between those who support the government's nationalist agenda and those who fear it is leading the country toward isolation and decline. This polarization is more than just heated debates or ideological differences. It is a battle over the country's very identity. When a nation turns against itself, it weakens from within. The lessons of history are clear. Strong nations are not those without disagreements, but those that can bridge them. The future remains unwritten, but one thing is certain. Every nation reaches a point where it must decide whether to cling to power at any cost or choose a path of unity, dialogue, and resilience. The choice Poland makes now will define its legacy for generations to come. Poland stands at a crossroads. Will it choose unity and stability, or continue down a path of division and economic uncertainty? What do you think? Is Poland heading toward deeper crisis, or can it still turn things around? Comment, "Poland will recover" if you believe in a brighter future, or "Poland is in trouble" if you think the challenges are too great. Let's see where the majority stands. 6. Serbia, the rise of authoritarianism. Serbia stands at a pivotal moment in its modern history, caught between rising authoritarianism and the hope for a more democratic and stable future. Under President Aleksandar Vučić, concerns about suppression of opposition voices, state-controlled media, and the use of security forces to silence dissent have only intensified. What once seemed like a nation moving toward European integration and democratic values is now increasingly resembling a state where power is concentrated in the hands of a few. The signs are clear. Press freedom is diminishing, protests are met with force, and corruption is deeply embedded within government institutions. Yet, corruption is not just a political issue. It is a poison that seeps into everyday life, affecting businesses, foreign investments, and the opportunities available to ordinary citizens. Foreign investors may bring money and infrastructure, but often the terms are far from fair. The wealth they generate benefits a select few rather than the people who need it most. When leadership prioritizes power over progress, the people are left wondering, is Serbia truly moving forward, or is it slowly slipping into a future where freedom and prosperity are out of reach? Beyond politics, Serbia's economic challenges are growing, and the situation is becoming harder to ignore. Youth unemployment remains alarmingly high, pushing many of Serbia's brightest minds to leave the country in search of better opportunities abroad. This brain drain is not just a statistic, it is a national crisis. When young people see no future in their homeland, when they believe that success is only possible elsewhere, what happens to the future of the country itself? A nation that cannot retain its youth loses not just its workforce, but its creativity, innovation, and potential for progress. Meanwhile, economic instability remains a pressing concern, as dependence on foreign capital, fluctuating markets, and unresolved trade disputes limit long-term growth. And then, there's the ever-present ethnic tension, particularly regarding Kosovo. This unresolved conflict continues to fuel regional instability, nationalist rhetoric, and geopolitical uncertainty. 5. Italy, a nation on the edge of collapse. Italy, a country that has stood as a pillar of civilization for centuries, now finds itself at a precarious crossroads, where economic struggles, political instability, and demographic decline threaten to pull it into deeper crisis. With a public debt-to-GDP ratio exceeding 140%, Italy carries one of the heaviest financial burdens in Europe, and its sluggish economic growth has made the situation even more dire. Bureaucratic inefficiency, high taxes, and a rigid labor market have created an environment where innovation is stifled and businesses struggle to thrive. While other nations have adapted to the demands of a modern economy, Italy remains trapped in a system that resists change. Without structural reforms and a commitment to economic modernization, how can Italy hope to compete in an increasingly competitive global landscape? When a nation's financial foundations begin to crumble, it is not just numbers on a page, it is livelihoods, businesses, and the future of an entire generation that hang in the balance. Yet, Italy's problems extend far beyond the economy. Political instability has been a defining trait of Italian governance for decades, with frequent leadership changes preventing long-term solutions from taking root. In a democracy, stability is key, but when populist movements rise, polarization deepens, and coalitions collapse, the result is a nation that struggles to move forward. A government that cannot sustain itself cannot guide a country through crisis, and Italy has seen its fair share of failed leaderships. The rise of populist parties has further divided the nation, turning every policy debate into a battle of ideology rather than an opportunity for progress. And then there is the looming banking crisis, another symptom of a nation in distress. Several major banks are drowning in bad loans, threatening to send shockwaves through the financial system. A failing banking sector is not just a problem for investors, it affects ordinary citizens, businesses, and retirees who rely on financial stability for their future. If Italy's banks continue to weaken, how long before confidence in the system collapses altogether? At the same time, Italy is facing an even more concerning challenge: a demographic crisis that is reshaping its future in ways that few are prepared to address. With one of the lowest birth rates in Europe, the country's shrinking workforce is placing enormous pressure on social welfare programs, pension systems, and economic productivity. Fewer young workers mean fewer taxpayers, and with an aging population requiring greater resources, who will bear the burden of sustaining Italy's future? Some have pointed to immigration as a potential solution, but instead of addressing it as an economic necessity, it has become a politically charged issue, fueling nationalist rhetoric and deepening divisions within society. Four, Ukraine, a nation in perpetual conflict. Ukraine, a nation that has endured immense hardship, finds itself at a defining moment where war, economic instability, and political uncertainty threaten its future. Since 2014, it has been at the center of one of the most complex geopolitical conflicts of our time, and as we approach 2025, the battle for sovereignty and survival continues to drain its economy, test its resilience, and challenge its people. The war with Russia has left entire cities in ruins, millions displaced, and infrastructure critically damaged, forcing the nation into a relentless cycle of rebuilding while still defending itself on the battlefield. Military expenditures consume a significant portion of national resources, leaving little room for economic growth or investment in essential services. Even as Ukraine fights for its independence, the reality remains grim. Can a country rebuild while still engaged in a war with no clear end in sight? Despite the hardship, Ukraine's economy has shown an astonishing ability to adapt, but it remains heavily dependent on foreign aid, IMF loans, and international support. However, reliance on external assistance is a double-edged sword. While it provides short-term relief, it also places Ukraine in a vulnerable position where economic sovereignty is constantly at risk. Foreign investors remain hesitant to commit to a war-torn country, fearing instability, while corruption continues to plague governmental institutions, making progress even more difficult. High inflation erodes the value of earnings, businesses struggle to operate under war-torn conditions, and unemployment remains dangerously high, leaving many Ukrainians uncertain about their future. The weight of these challenges falls not just on the government, but on ordinary citizens, who must endure the daily hardships of economic instability. Beyond the battlefield and the economy, Ukraine's spirit of unity has been its greatest strength. The people have shown unwavering resistance, refusing to surrender despite the odds. But even the strongest spirit can be tested when a nation is caught in perpetual conflict. History has shown that prolonged wars often lead to fractures within a nation, deepening internal divisions and creating further instability. Ukraine must not only defend itself from external threats, but also ensure that it does not crumble from within. There is an old Buddhist story about a warrior who was told he would face an invincible enemy. Instead of preparing for battle, he spent years strengthening himself from the inside, knowing that true victory does not come from fighting, but from resilience and wisdom. Ukraine's battle is not just one of military defense. It is also a test of endurance, strategy, and the ability to rebuild amid destruction. Ukraine has already proven its strength. Now it must prove that it can create a future beyond war, beyond aid, and beyond survival. Will it find a way forward, or will it remain trapped in the cycle of endless conflict? The future is uncertain, but history favors those who refuse to be defeated. 3. Greece, still recovering from financial ruin. Greece, a nation that once stood as the cradle of Western civilization, now finds itself locked in a battle for economic survival and political stability. The scars of the financial crisis of the 2010s still run deep, and while the country has exited its bailout programs, its economic recovery remains fragile. With a debt-to-GDP ratio exceeding 170%, Greece carries one of the highest financial burdens in the world, leaving little room for economic maneuvering. Growth is slow, heavily reliant on industries that are vulnerable to external shocks, and the shadow of past economic mismanagement still lingers. Tourism, a sector that brings in billions each year, is one of Greece's biggest strengths, but it is also one of its greatest weaknesses, because it remains at the mercy of global downturns, political instability, and the increasing effects of climate change. Beyond economics, Greece is grappling with a growing crisis of lost opportunity. Unemployment, particularly among the youth, remains alarmingly high, forcing many skilled workers to leave the country in search of better opportunities abroad. This brain drain is more than just an economic loss. It is a slow erosion of Greece's future. A country's greatest asset is not its natural beauty, not its historical landmarks, but its people. And yet many young Greeks are forced to choose between their love for their homeland and the need for financial security. What happens to a nation when its brightest minds, its most innovative thinkers, and its most ambitious workers see no future within its borders? A society that cannot provide for its young risks becoming a nation of lost potential. As Confucius once said, a man who does not think and plan long ahead will find trouble at his door. Without real structural reform, Greece risks remaining trapped in an endless cycle of economic stagnation, unable to build a stable future for the next generation. But economic struggles are only one part of Greece's challenges. Political pressures from both within and beyond its borders add another layer of uncertainty. The ongoing migration crisis has strained resources, testing the country's ability to provide stability for both its citizens and the thousands of refugees seeking safety on its shores. At the same time, tensions with Turkey over territorial disputes in the Aegean Sea threaten to escalate, adding geopolitical instability to an already fragile situation. With mounting financial pressure, a shrinking workforce, and ongoing regional instability, Greece stands at a crossroads once again. Will it finally break free from its cycle of economic and political turmoil, or is another crisis already looming on the horizon? The path forward is not easy, but nations, like individuals, must choose whether to remain trapped by their past or take bold steps toward an uncertain yet potentially prosperous future. Greece has already shown resilience throughout history, but does it have the vision, the leadership, and the determination to rise once more? The answer lies not in foreign aid or temporary solutions, but in the willingness to create a system that works for its people, sustains its economy, and redefines its role in an ever-changing world. What does the future hold for Greece? That depends on whether it is ready to let go of the weight of the past and embrace the challenges of tomorrow. Greece stands at a turning point. Will it rise again or remain stuck in economic struggles? What do you think? Comment, Greece will rebuild if you believe in its comeback, or Greece is stuck if you think its challenges are too big to overcome. Drop your answer below. 2. United Kingdom, a post-Brexit struggle. The United Kingdom, once a global financial and political powerhouse, now finds itself in a period of uncertainty, division, and economic turmoil, still grappling with the aftershocks of Brexit. The decision to leave the European Union, once framed as a step towards sovereignty and prosperity, has instead created disruptions that have rippled through nearly every sector. Trade barriers, supply chain breakdowns, labor shortages, and rising inflation have contributed to a worsening cost of living crisis, leaving businesses and ordinary citizens struggling to adjust. Manufacturing and finance, two pillars of the British economy, have been hit particularly hard, as companies face increased bureaucracy, higher operational costs, and reduced access to European markets. For many, the promise of a stronger, independent economy has turned into a reality where growth is sluggish, wages lag behind inflation, and economic stability feels further away than ever. As Winston Churchill once said, "To each there comes in their lifetime a special moment when they are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing. What a tragedy if that moment finds them unprepared." Has the UK been unprepared for the post-Brexit world, or does it still have time to adapt and rebuild? But the UK's struggles go beyond just economics. Political instability has plagued the nation, with frequent leadership changes, internal party conflicts, and wavering public trust in the government. A divided leadership is a divided nation, and when politicians spend more time fighting each other than solving real issues, the country suffers. Over the past few years, the UK has cycled through multiple prime ministers, each promising stability but failing to deliver it. This has left businesses uncertain, investors wary, and citizens frustrated. Meanwhile, social unrest has intensified, as the very fabric of daily life, healthcare, transportation, and public services, struggles under financial strain. Strikes by workers demanding better wages and conditions have become more frequent, a clear sign that the system is failing those who rely on it most. At the heart of the issue is a simple but important question. What does the government prioritize? Corporate interests, political control, or the well-being of its people? And then there is the issue of national unity itself, which is no longer guaranteed. Scotland's renewed push for independence threatens to break apart the very fabric of the UK, raising fundamental questions about what it means to be British in a post-Brexit world. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand, and yet the fractures are deepening, not healing. The Buddha once said, "Unity can only be manifested by the binary. Unity itself and the idea of unity are already two." The UK must ask itself, does it want to remain a united entity, or will it continue down a path where division and fragmentation become inevitable? With economic hardships mounting, political instability growing, and national identity being questioned, the UK stands at a crossroads. History teaches us that nations rise and fall, not just because of external forces, but because of the choices they make in times of uncertainty. The UK's future depends not just on policies, but on the ability of its people and leaders to recognize the reality of their situation and act with wisdom and unity. 1. Turkey, a nation on the brink. Turkey, once seen as a bridge between East and West, now finds itself at a critical juncture, struggling under the weight of political repression, economic turmoil, and growing international isolation. The nation's economic woes have reached an alarming level. Inflation has soared, crushing the purchasing power of ordinary citizens, and the Turkish lira has plummeted, wiping out savings and making business operations increasingly difficult. What was once a rapidly developing economy is now grappling with financial instability that threatens both its domestic stability and global standing. When a currency collapses, it doesn't just impact numbers on a stock market screen. It affects families trying to afford basic necessities, businesses struggling to pay wages, and an entire nation wondering what tomorrow will bring. As Confucius once said, "A man who does not plan long ahead will find trouble at his door." The question now is, has Turkey's leadership failed to prepare for this economic storm, or is there still a way to reverse course? Beyond the economy, Turkey's political climate has become increasingly oppressive, with President Erdogan's tightening grip on power weakening democratic institutions and silencing opposition voices. Protests erupt across the country, yet they are met with harsh crackdowns, censorship, and arrests, as the government seeks to maintain control at any cost. A true democracy is built on open discourse, fair elections, and a government that serves its people. But in Turkey, these ideals are slipping away. The more a government relies on force to maintain power, the more fragile it becomes. History has shown this time and again. When leaders prioritize power over progress, freedom over fear, and control over cooperation, they set their nation on a dangerous path. The Buddha once said, "Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." Is Turkey's leadership holding on to a version of control that will ultimately poison its own future? Compounding Turkey's struggles is its increasingly tense geopolitical position. Once a strategic partner of both NATO and the EU, Turkey has found itself at odds with the West, creating diplomatic rifts that weaken its influence and limit its economic and military alliances. Its involvement in regional conflicts and power struggles has further strained relationships, leaving Turkey in a precarious position. Too distant from its allies, yet too entangled in regional disputes to stand alone. A country that isolates itself on the world stage risks not only economic sanctions and trade restrictions, but also a diminished role in shaping global affairs. A nation does not collapse overnight, but when economic instability, political repression, and diplomatic failures all converge, the risk becomes undeniable. Turkey stands at a pivotal moment. Will it choose to restore stability, or is a deeper collapse inevitable? The future remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. No country can ignore its internal struggles and expect to thrive. The decisions Turkey makes today will shape its destiny for decades to come. As we reach the end of this discussion, your voice matters more than ever. Which of these nations do you believe is at the greatest risk of collapse? Do you see a path for any of them to recover and rebuild, or are they trapped in a cycle of decline that they cannot escape? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts, because perspectives like yours make this community stronger. In an era where information spreads faster than ever, understanding these global challenges is not just about watching from the sidelines. It's about engaging, questioning, and thinking critically about what comes next. The struggles facing these 10 nations are not isolated events. They are deeply interconnected dilemmas that could shift the balance of power across Europe and beyond. The economic turmoil, political instability, and social unrest within these countries do not exist in a vacuum. They have the potential to create ripple effects that will impact global markets, international relations, and even everyday lives. A nation's fall is never just its own burden to bear. As history has shown, when one country collapses, the consequences can spread far beyond its borders, affecting trade, investments, security, and alliances. Will the European Union hold strong in the face of these mounting crises, or will internal fragmentation weaken it from within? Could growing nationalist movements and economic hardships lead to another major shift in global power? The financial markets are watching closely, governments are scrambling to respond, and the future of the European continent hangs in the balance. But even in the darkest of times, hope has always been humanity's greatest ally. History is full of moments where economic collapse, political struggles, and social upheaval have paved the way for resilience, innovation, and reform. Just as a forest fire clears the way for new growth, crises often become the catalyst for change. When systems fail, people adapt. When governments falter, citizens rise to demand accountability. The Buddha once said, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." In times of great uncertainty, nations must do the same. They must acknowledge their reality, act decisively, and work towards meaningful solutions rather than being paralyzed by fear of the unknown. The greatest danger is not the crisis itself, but the failure to respond with wisdom, unity, and vision. So, as we move deeper into 2025, one thing is clear: the next few years will be pivotal. Governments, policymakers, and everyday citizens will all be faced with difficult choices, choices that will define their futures for generations to come. If this deep dive into Europe's unfolding crisis has given you valuable insight, don't forget to take action. Like this video to support our work. Share it with others who need to stay ahead of these global shifts. Subscribe to the Journey of Wisdom and turn on notifications so you never miss our next in-depth analysis. Your engagement helps us continue delivering well-researched, thought-provoking content that cuts through the noise and brings critical discussions to light. If you appreciate the effort behind these videos, consider leaving a super thanks. Every bit of support allows us to keep uncovering the truth and bringing clarity to a world in flux. Until next time, stay informed, stay aware, and keep seeking wisdom.